All right. Hi, this is Martha of Just Martha Designs. I'm also the author, Martha L. Thurston. I write a lot of, I want to say it's more like young adult books, mostly middle grader books. But I wanted to kind of do a little video and talk about the fact that back in October, I had an issue where I fell in the classroom because I'm also a teacher, and fell in the classroom, was a little concerned because a lot of the things that led up to me falling in the classroom came from some muscle pain that had been growing more and more frequently, that I was having muscle pains. And so after a visit to the emergency room, because my school suggested that I go to the emergency room, they preferred me to go by ambulance. I said no. So I went to the emergency room and they ran all sorts of tests to determine what it was that I had. And after running blood work and CT scans and x-rays and all sorts of things to try to determine what caused me to fall. And, you know, I told the ER doctor, I said, you know, there's a lot going on, and there's been a lot going on since 2006. So he said, well, I really hate to say it, but I'm thinking more along the lines of multiple sclerosis. And he said, you have a history of having seen a neurosurgeon, a neurologist, rheumatologist. And he said, so I'm going to send you to a neurologist. I said, okay. So my first visit with the neurologist, I informed him of my medical history, and I'll let you know a little bit about my medical history. In 2004, prior to things becoming worse, 2004, I had an episode where I can recall making Christmas ornaments with my children. They were very small. My children were very small at the time. And I remember I'd forgotten something that we were using to make ornaments with. So I went back to my bedroom to go find it. And I remember reaching out and my hand just sort of curled back and kind of curled back into itself. And I could feel at the time my right leg was starting to do the same thing. My toes had started to curl backwards. I could feel, you know, inside my shoes. So I immediately began to go outside because I was going to get help. And I really didn't want my children to see me that way. So I went out to out of the apartment. I made it all the way out to the sidewalk when I collapsed, and they called an ambulance for me. And the emergency room then stated that it was stress and that I was just it was just nerves, and here, have an Ativan, you know, here's a prescription for Ativan, and you'll take all of these things and you'll feel better and you'll learn how to cope with that. And so that was pretty much how they wanted me to cope with it then, instead of going, oh, perhaps there's something a little more wrong. So for 2 years, I dealt with it that way. I think I took the medication that they prescribed for maybe I don't even think I took it a month, because I really didn't like the fact that here I was trying to take care of 2 small children and being completely just out of it. And so I stopped taking the medication. I said, I'll learn how to cope with it and deal with it, and if anything else happens, then so be it. Fast forward to 2 years later, after watching my, just struggling and having so many issues, and watching my child at a soccer game, at the end of the game, I mean, I couldn't even clap for him. I couldn't raise my hands. I'd gotten to the point that I couldn't comb my hair, couldn't feed myself, and I just said, you know, it's time to go to the emergency room. Well, in the emergency room, they ran all sorts of tests and referred me to an internal specialist, because they stated that at the time, my blood sugar was very high. And she asked me, she said, what did you eat today? And I said, nothing. And she said, no, you're lying. I said, I haven't been able to feed myself for several days, so no, I've had nothing. So when I went to the emergency room, and they referred me to the internal specialist. The internal specialist just asked me, said, what's wrong? And so I told her, I said, my hair was falling out. My skin was very dry. I had gained weight without even trying. And it wasn't as though it was something that I'm trying not to, you know, that I was just eating out of control or something like that. Because the year prior, I mean, I was out running around on a soccer field coaching soccer. So it wasn't as though I had a very sedentary lifestyle. And so she said, well, you know, what do you think's wrong? And I said, well, I think it's my thyroid. She said, well, I think we'll test it. Well, at the time when it came back, my thyroid, my TSH was an 18. It should be somewhere between 2, really shouldn't be past a 7. 7 is kind of pushing it. And so that was out of the norms. So she said, well, your thyroid, there's something wrong with it. And so I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. Because I had went to the emergency room with motor issues, meaning that I was having difficulty walking and I was having difficulty with raising my arms, the first thing that they do is they send you to a neurosurgeon. And they had prescribed an MRI prior to that of my neck, and then sent me to the neurosurgeon. And the neurosurgeon stated that there was some stenosis in my neck, but where it was located, she stated that it had nothing to do with having an issue with walking. So great. So when we progressed a little further, she said, I'm going to do an MRI of your brain. And afterwards, she decided to send me to a rheumatologist and a neurologist. And the neurologist stated that he thought that I had lupus. The rheumatologist said no, that I had fibromyalgia. The rheumatologist also diagnosed me with restless leg syndrome. Now, restless leg syndrome and Cramps Fasciculation Syndrome, those two are very much connected. Now, in 2006, when all of this was going on, the way that the rheumatologist decided to treat me for the restless leg syndrome was she prescribed pain medication, because of course I was in a lot of pain medication, and muscle relaxers. Remember, I have small children. In fact, I had boys. And if you've raised boys, then you know that raising boys requires a lot of activity. So I tried to take the medication as prescribed, was taking at the time an antidepressant, the muscle relaxers, the pain pain medication that they prescribed, plus for the hypothyroidism, plus they gave me something else for the joints that I had. I was having pain in my joints, so they gave me that, and the neurologist prescribed to me Topamax, which by far it has been the worst nightmare. I do not recommend Topamax, and I'm sure that there are people out there who have had great success on that, but taking Topamax caused me to not only hallucinate, but also I no longer could spell the way that I could. As a matter of fact, I still have issues today, and here it is, 2017, so 11 years later, I have issues when I see my own name of recognizing whether or not it's spelled correctly. And so I double check multiple times to make sure. And that's very difficult for me considering the fact that I am an English teacher. So English teachers should know how to spell. Going into all of that, I did not get along with the rheumatologist, could not stand. Every time I stated something, she would talk down to me as though I had no clue what I was talking about. And that wasn't the kind of relationship that I wanted to have with a doctor. And as a matter of fact, I feel that you should be able to go in and talk to your doctor if there are any new symptoms and things that come up, that your doctor should really be able to tell you something more than just, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so I stopped seeing a rheumatologist and just stayed strictly with my internal specialist, and I told her my concerns with the rheumatologist, and she said, that's fine, we can take care of all of that here. So we eventually got to the point where I could stop taking the pain medication. I learned how to cope with the pain, and I stopped taking the muscle relaxers because I wanted to be a little bit more alert. So that was all between the years 2006 and 2008. Well, fast forward to 2016, and me falling in the classroom and starting to go back through this process. Well, the neurologist stated to me, he said, I don't think that you have an issue with any of this. I don't feel that it's multiple sclerosis. I don't feel that it's lupus. I don't feel that it's, and he just kept going on and on. And I said, okay. And he said, don't worry about it. It's going to be something that's minor. And so I said, trusted him, and I said, okay. And he was a very happy and jovial doctor. Really enjoyed going to see him, and I've seen him quite a lot since October. So I had an MRI on my brain, and it was clear. So that ruled out the multiple sclerosis. I had blood work that ruled out there being any type of that it was some kind of deficiency or anything like that, or me just being prone to having a lot of pain in my muscles. Because what was happening was I could almost feel it coming on when this all began. This time it was my shoe. And I remember driving in the car, being so uncomfortable with my shoe touching my foot, and it just triggered a spasm in my foot where my foot just, the muscle just kind of seized up. So I remember taking my shoe off. I was leaving a meeting, driving back to work, and having to take my shoe off in the car as I'm driving because I just could not stand the feel of the shoe touching my foot. And it wasn't an uncomfortable kind of pressure. it felt as though someone had taken a knife and driven it into the side of my foot. I mean, it was very painful. Had been having a lot of pain that was gradually getting worse. Add to that I felt so exhausted and tired every single day. I mean, people just told me, said, you just don't seem happy teaching anymore. And I'm like, I love my job. I love teaching. Really, it really doesn't show. And I think that a lot of it didn't show because I was constantly in pain. I was constantly hurting. There were days when just the touch of clothing just caused me to be in such pain. Noise in the classroom was very painful. Really didn't think much about that one until I realized that just recently that I could turn up the radio and it didn't bother my ears. So we were going through all of these tests, and it finally came down to, he said, we're going to do an EMG. And he said, I'm still not, I still don't think there's anything wrong. So I had the EMG. It was the end of November, or the first, maybe in the 1st of December. The 1st of December, I had an EMG, and the doctor, who was always so happy and jovial and always reassured me there's nothing wrong, suddenly had this very concerned look on his face. And I wasn't really sure what the concerned look was about or how that factored into anything. But he seemed very concerned. And I remember him telling me, your muscle's too noisy when it's supposed to be at rest. Okay, that's the only thing that he would tell me. And I thought to myself, well, I kind of knew that because I would always have a feeling or a sensation, it didn't matter where, often all over, where I could feel, it felt like something was crawling all over me. And generally it wasn't that there was something crawling on me. If you look really close, you could see the muscles moving underneath the surface of the skin. And so for him to tell me the muscle's a little too noisy and that it shouldn't be moving, it really just didn't dawn on me. So he wouldn't tell me anything then. He said, I'll see you in 3 weeks. And I said, okay. So meanwhile, I come home and I do all sorts of research. And what do I find? Oh, yeah, this is kind of related to ALS. And so I am freaking out because I'm afraid that I have ALS. Well, when I went back to him on the 29th of December, he told me that what I had was Cramps Fasciculation Syndrome. And he said, versus Dystonia. And he said, some of the things that you've told me where I would have muscles that just sort of spasmed up, my fingers drawing up, sometimes my neck, I mean, the day that I went in to speak to him, I could barely turn and look at him because my neck felt like my head was being pulled around. And I was fighting it for all it was worth. I mean, it was a really bad day for me. I was hurting from the waist up. I can't explain how hard it was on a daily basis to go through this process of feeling as though I, at any moment, you know, that my body was just, that's it, it's just going to stop. I know it is. The pain was unbelievable, and I was still fighting to have a regular life. There were times when I couldn't even think clearly, times when it was very difficult for me to even talk because not only was every muscle in my body, including my vocal cords, I would have times when I would completely lose my voice. my mouth would not form the words that I wanted to say, and I really had to push past that. And I still have a little bit of an issue, and I'll explain why in a moment. But he said, I feel that there's a lot of the dystonia going on, because I would have terrible cramps in the middle of the night. My foot would bend backwards, and so the next morning when I wake up, my foot was still locked in that position. I would have to put shoes on and clothes on and go to work and walk down the hallway, and you're trying to walk down the hallway at a normal kind of rate and not knowing if your foot's going to catch and drag, or you're going to just absolutely fall, or as you're walking the muscle seize up, and I fell, bruised the whole side of me, just because I just had those moments where the muscle would just lock up and seize up, and then there I was in the classroom and trying not to hit the floor so that I didn't freak out the students. Well, when he stated it was Cramps Fasciculation Syndrome, he told me that it's very rare. Believe it or not, it's very rare. Some of the research that I did myself showed that only 0.7% of the women actually get the Cramps Fasciculation Syndrome. Sometimes it does lead to other things, and there are other autoimmune diseases that are associated with it. But for the most part, it could just be that's all that it's going to be. The nerve endings are very hypersensitive, and that explains a lot that's going on with not only my sound. Sometimes it's vision. Sometimes things can be too bright. With the touch, there are times when I don't want to be touched because everything's too sensitive. I'm very picky about the feel of fabric, the feel of shoes, the feel. Everything has to. It just has to feel right. So he stated that the first thing that he was going to do is treat me with a Parkinson's drug, one that they used because he said that we needed to stop the dystonia before we moved on to actually stopping the muscles from firing. So that the Parkinson's drug takes care of the dystonia, and then the seizure medication is supposed to take care of the constant, the muscles constantly moving. Because what's happening, my muscles are constantly moving, so that causes me to be exhausted, and then after a while it becomes so overstimulated that the dystonia sets in, and that's when I start getting the really bad cramps, and the muscles kind of freezing up. So he placed me on, let's see if I can get the name of it right, carbidopa levodopa. So Parkinson's medication. Some of the side effects of it are nausea and weight loss, and it says that it makes you sleepy. It does not make me sleepy. In fact, it kind of hypes me up a little bit. It also can cause some hallucinations. Really, I have really vivid and violent dreams. It's terrible. But along with some of the research that I did on the medication stated that if you skip a dose or you forget to take the dose at the exact time of the day, the wear off time of this medication. So I'm taking it 3 times a day, spacing it out 8 hours. And if you forget to take this medication, then chances are your symptoms will come back very suddenly. Now, I read this online and I thought to myself, oh, okay, so I'm going to remember to take my medication and not skip a dose. And when I say not skip a dose, that means instead of taking 3 pills a day, I take 2. Well, I started taking the medication on, I believe it was Thursday. So I took my first dose on Thursday night. Friday, I took it 3 times a day. Saturday, I took it 3 times a day. Sunday, 3 times a day. Monday, 3 times a day. Tuesday, I took it 3 times a day. Now, today is Wednesday. This morning, as I was going out the door, and I kept feeling like I'm forgetting something. Made it all the way to the school, walked into my classroom, and I went, oh, I forgot to bring my medication with me. And so, sorry. So I turned around and I said, well, okay, that won't be a problem. I can wait till I get home and I can kind of leave work a little early and I'll take it. It won't be a big deal as long as I take it. Now, through the past couple of days of actually taking medication 3 times a day like I'm supposed to, I noticed that yesterday was our first full day back to work after a 2-week winter break. And all the other teachers and I were talking about this morning how we were so tired and exhausted yesterday, and oh yeah, our aching joints. It was a normal kind of ache. Yes, I was tired, but I was tired because first day back. I don't think that the pain that I was in, it was a little bit, I had a little hip pain, little ankle pain. For some reason, my ankle hurt more. I wore a different pair of shoes than I normally would. So I had a little bit of ankle pain and some hip pain and a little lower back pain. But those are all normal, oh my goodness, I feel my age kind of pains. It was a lot different from the type of pain that I felt from the CFS. So toward the end of the day, my last class period, I suddenly had this wave of nausea just came over me because I had begun to hurt. It was almost unbearable. The muscles in my thighs, in my calves, in my feet, in my arms, in my hands had suddenly just tightened up like that somebody was draw, and I really felt that if my fingers would draw up if I let them. I was miserable. When I got out to the car, because I told someone, I said, listen, I missed my dose of medication and I think I need to go home and take it. And so they were, oh, no problem, go on ahead. So when I got into my car and I turned it on, the station, the radio was set the same thing that it was that morning when I got out of it, which was kind of at a 7 on the volume. I quickly had to turn it down. I thought, well, that's just kind of odd. Horrible. I felt horrible. I pulled up at the house and I get out of the car and I'm trying to make it up the steps. And I say trying because I had gone from the day before walking up the steps with no problem, carrying 4 grocery bags, to I could barely move my legs to pull myself up. I had to grab a hold of the handrails and pull myself up and was still struggling. And my son looked at me and he said, I thought you were going to crawl up the steps. Felt horrible. Went into the house, took the medication. 1 hour later, I now was back to the pain that I had changed to suddenly I had the same little achy joint type pain. The muscle pain was completely gone. All of it. I was amazed when they tell you not to miss a dose. They mean don't be late taking that medication. I will not do that again. That was my lesson learned. He told me when I saw, the doctor told me when I saw him, he said that they would not be able to get me to being 100% symptom free. That at most I would be 50 to 60% symptom free. As I was dragging myself up the steps this afternoon, I realized 60% sounds pretty doggone good right now. And that's my lesson for you today.